process. So who is this person right here? Anybody? Shout it out. Tiger Woods. Okay. Is he going to win the TPC this weekend? Anybody? Okay. I love watching golf when he's golfing. I hate golfers because I used to caddy. Okay. So what does Tiger talk about in terms of the most salient, important early experience for him? Whenever he's interviewed, what does he talk about? His father. I've never been at an audience yet where they don't get that. His relationship with his father was the most salient part of his early experiences. It provided the motivation. He wasn't born wanting to, he enjoyed swinging a golf club, but the relationship, the bonding, the attachment that he had with his dad at those times when he was practicing or out on the course, he doesn't talk about what his father taught him specifically about how to hold the club or how to stand. He talks about that relationship. That relationship is part and parcel of who Tiger Woods is today and why he's great. Yes, he inherited genes that gave him better shoulders than me, right? And he has incredible torque. He's very strong, works in the gym at it. But it was not the genes that he inherited. It was that really meant so much, and his community around him that gave him that support, and that had an effect on sculpting the circuitry that makes him who he is today. So I want to put this in perspective in terms of how we talk about this as neuroscientists. Healthy development of brain architecture depends a lot on interactions of what we call serve and return. I heard that today in the social emotional session that I attended. There's an expectation that when an infant responds or references something, it's not in isolation. They expect something in return, what we call serve and return. In the absence of that serve and return, or if it's serve and return, if the return is something that's very stressful, like toxic stress, which I'll tell you about, then it has a very powerful impact. But in the absence of serve and return, it also has a powerful impact on brain architectures. So this is instinctive. Babies become face experts almost immediately. They recognize who their primary caregivers are. They recognize who's going to change their diapers, who's going to give them food. And they recognize that these are the individuals that are going to open up the world to them. And this is how they learn about the world about them. So serve and return is that it works best with adults who are familiar to the child, like familiar partners. So the revolving door of care is a bad thing. Just like the revolving door in a business is a bad thing. When I talk to business people about this, what's the worst thing in the world that you have to deal with? Turnover. Why? Because you have to teach things over and over and over again. You have to learn from the beginning. This is no different in terms of early programs, stability. And that's true for a lifetime. I saw it in my mother, who just passed away recently. She had Alzheimer's disease, and stability for her meant emotional stability. She knew who I was on the days when things were stable in the nursing home. She had major problems when there was a change in staff. And when staff turned over rapidly, she had major problems adjusting to that. No different than for children. These interactions affect everything. Brain architecture and brain chemistry. And by the way, when you talk to business leaders about what they look for in their workforce, this all sounds touchy-feely, right? Get in touch with your emotions. You talk to business leaders about this. What do they look for? They don't actually care about IQ, as long as it's above a certain level. They actually care about this aspect of individuals, of the development of social and emotional skills, the ability of people to work together, the ability of people to solve problems together, the ability of people to be socially and emotionally regulated so they can control their emotions during the course of a day when unexpected things happen. This is as important and is actually part and parcel of cognitive development, and I'm going to show you. So there's my little serve and return. Okay. So there's this balancing act between positive and negative experiences. This is how I actually made this picture myself. It's pretty good, huh? So, part of what the child is learning is how to balance these positive and negative experiences, which have an impact on how their fear and anxiety systems develop over this period of time. So early positive experiences are going to create a situation where the child is going to be balanced in a way that's going to allow them to adjust much more readily to when those negative experiences come along. That's really critical. It's not just about what's happening for the moment. It's about preparing them for a lifetime of being able to manage adversity, being able to manage unexpected situations. And these things that are learned early on, last a lifetime. The later the interventions occur, the more difficult it is to change. It's not hopeless, but it's much more expensive, and it's much more difficult to make those changes later on. So early childhood adversity can influence a range of long-term outcomes, and we know that these negative experiences affect the stress response system. I'll talk about that in a minute, and I'll show you some fascinating research that shows why it is that these early toxic stressors have such a long-term effect on an individual, on a child's brain, and how they're going to perform for a lifetime. But keep this in mind. This is not just about social emotional development and cognitive development. If you look at the data, the statistics, and it's been replicated over and over and over again, the number of child adverse experiences is correlated with increased risk, not just for mental health disorders, but for cardiovascular disease, for cancer, for diabetes. Because the brain controls a lot of how those systems function. So if you're up to 4 or more early childhood adverse experiences, your numbers are off the chart in terms of the likelihood of you getting cardiovascular disease or cancer. So from a health care perspective, beyond what we're talking about here at this meeting, this becomes a very, very important component of what we're doing in terms of our early programs. So let me show you this in terms of what's been looked at in institutionalized children. Now what you see on the vertical axis, it says percentage of children with abnormal stress response regulation. That's the cortisol that we secrete. And by the way, being stressed, like I am now a little bit, is okay. It's just that I've learned how to regulate it. So I get stressed for the moment, right? I get my energy up. That's what cortisol does. Get your glucose going so you have energy. But if it stays up a long time, it's like putting your foot on the gas pedal, right? Sooner or later, the engine's going to wear out. You've got to be able to regulate it. Go up for the moment, regulate it, and come down. So for middle-class U.S. toddlers in their birth families, when you look at the percentage of children who have atypical regulation of their stress hormones, it's about 7% or so. If you look at neglected or maltreated toddlers arriving from orphanages overseas, and this was studies that were done up in Minnesota, it's about 35 to 40%. That's an unbelievable difference. And that tells you that those early periods of neglect had a dramatic effect on how those children are going to be able to deal with the stressors of life. Now let me show you why extreme neglect, we tend to focus on abuse. I've talked to legal people, to judges about this as well. Neglect is a powerful experience. And let me show you why. So what you're looking at is not Charlie Brown's head. Look carefully. There's a little triangle up above. That's the individual's nose. So you're looking at the top of the head. And we can record electrical activity. And this was done by Chuck Nelson and Nathan Fox, who are part of our council. And they show that if you look at different frequencies of electrical activity, that's the 3 to 5, the 6 to 9, and the 10 to 18, you're looking at a heat map. The redder the color, the more electrical activity there is. So, look here in the institutionalized compared to the never institutionalized. That's the front part of your brain that's involved in memory and learning and emotional regulation. Much more activity in the never institutionalized kids. So there's an effect of neglect on brain power, essentially. It's like comparing a 25-watt bulb to a 100-watt bulb. So this is not amorphous stuff. This is actually having an effect on brain wiring and the ability of the brain to function. Look at this one. This is in a different frequency. There's almost no activity in the institutionalized kids compared to the non-institutionalized kids. So when I first saw this data from these experiments, I was just floored. And I've been doing science for a long time. This is unbelievable in terms of what we're doing to children's brains. And this is the last one here.